He called it a family lunch. That should have been my first warning. My son doesn't do family lunches. Not since his father passed, anyway. Sunday meals quietly became something we talked about doing and never actually did. So when he phoned on a Thursday evening, voice a little too casual, suggesting we all get together that weekend, him, his wife, and me, I told myself it was a good sign, that maybe things were shifting, that maybe the distance I'd felt growing between us over the past couple of years was finally something he wanted to close. I made a potato leek soup from scratch. I set the table properly, the way his grandmother taught me. Linen napkins, real plates, not the everyday ones. I even put out a small vase of dried lavender because I remembered his wife once said she liked the smell. I was 63 years old. I owned my home outright. I had my pension from 31 years teaching elementary school in the same district, and I was, by every measure I could think of, perfectly fine. Better than fine, actually. I had started watercolor classes at the community center in January. I walked 5 kilometers every morning before the neighborhood woke up. I had a book club on the third Wednesday of every month, and friends who actually showed up when they said they would. I was not struggling. I was not lonely in the way that needs fixing. I was just living, which is something I had worked very hard to do after my husband died. But I'm getting ahead of myself. They arrived 20 minutes late, which didn't bother me. My daughter-in-law always ran late. I'd made peace with that years ago. What bothered me was the way they came through the door, him first, not meeting my eyes right away, and her behind him carrying a canvas tote bag that she set down very deliberately on the bench by the entrance, like she'd been thinking about where to put it for the whole drive over. We sat. We had soup. My son talked about work, something about a contract that was taking longer than expected, a client who kept changing the scope. His wife talked about their youngest starting skating lessons. I talked about my watercolor class, about a great blue heron I'd painted from memory that my instructor said had real feeling to it. It was pleasant enough. It was the kind of lunch where you can feel the real conversation waiting just past the small talk, patient as a creditor. The tote bag sat by the door the whole time. After the dishes were cleared and I'd put the kettle on, my daughter-in-law reached over and set something on the table between us. A brochure, glossy. A photograph of a building that looked like a hotel lobby crossed with a hospital, surrounded by very neat gardens. Lakeview Terrace Retirement Living. Where every day feels like home. I looked at it. I looked at my son. He was looking at his hands. "We've been doing a bit of research," my daughter-in-law said. Her name is Brit, short for Brittany, though she stopped going by that in university. She has a way of making statements sound like they're for your benefit. Like she's delivering good news that you're just not equipped to appreciate yet. There are some really beautiful options now. It's not what it used to be. Some of these places have fitness facilities, art studios, the full thing. I picked up the brochure. Lakeview Terrace was located 45 minutes from my house. From my house where I had lived for 22 years, the house where my children grew up. The house where my husband and I painted every room ourselves over 3 separate summers, arguing happily about colors, him always wanting something darker than I did, both of us eventually compromising on something neither of us had originally wanted and both of us ending up loving. "The art studio is nice," I said. "They have a waiting list," my son said. Still looking at his hands, "But we checked and apparently if you apply now, you could get in by fall." Fall. It was April. They had already looked into the waiting list. "I have a watercolor class at the community center," I said. "On Tuesdays, Mom!" My son finally looked up. He had his father's eyes. That had always undone me a little. "We're worried about you." "Worried about what?" He glanced at his wife. She gave him the smallest nod. "You're here alone. The house is a lot to manage. Dad's been gone for 3 years, and we just think it might be time to think about what the next chapter looks like. Before something happens, rather than after. Before something happens. As if I were a roof with a slow leak. "Nothing has happened," I said. "That's the point," Britt said. She leaned forward slightly. She was wearing a gray blazer, and she had the focused expression of someone who had prepared talking points. "You'd be making the choice while you're healthy, while you have options. That's the ideal time. And the house. She paused. The house could be such a financial asset for you. The equity alone. There it was, the real sentence, the one that had been waiting in the wings through the whole lunch. The house, my house, a 3-bedroom Cape Cod in a neighborhood that had quietly tripled in value since we bought it. No mortgage. Mine. I set the brochure back on the table. I appreciate that you've thought about this, I said, and I meant it, partially. I knew my son loved me. I knew that whatever this was, it had started from something real in him. Worry, guilt, the helplessness children feel when a parent ages and there's nothing to be done about it. But I also knew that the glossy brochure had been in Britt's tote bag before they even knocked on my door. They had not come to discuss. They had come to present. I'm not ready to think about retirement living, I said. I'm 63. I'm healthy. I walk 5 kilometers every day. It's not about now, Britt said patiently. It's about planning. I have a plan, I said. It's called living in my house. The lunch ended not long after that. Politely, without resolution. My son hugged me at the door in the way people hug when they feel they've failed at something and aren't sure whose fault it is. Britt said to call if I had any questions about Lakeview Terrace. The brochure stayed on my table after they left. I didn't throw it away. I'm not sure why. Maybe I wanted to keep looking at it. Maybe I needed it to stay real. That night I made myself a cup of chamomile tea, and I sat in the kitchen for a long time, not reading the book I brought to the table. My house was quiet. It had been quiet for 3 years. I had gotten used to the quiet in the way you get used to most hard things. Not by making it go away, but by making room for it, letting it exist alongside everything else. The quiet didn't frighten me. What frightened me, I was starting to realize, was that my son had looked at my life and seen a problem to be solved. I slept badly. In the morning, I walked my 5 kilometers in the rain. The second conversation happened 2 weeks later. This time, it was a phone call. My son, alone, Britt wasn't on the line, or at least wasn't announced, and his voice had a different texture to it. Less rehearsed, more tired. I talked to the bank this week, he said. About what? The mortgage. Our mortgage. We're a bit stretched right now with the kids and the renovation we put off and He stopped. It's just tight. And we were thinking, if you did move to Lakeview Terrace, even eventually, the sale of the house could help everyone. I sat down. I hadn't been sitting before. Help everyone, I repeated. Mom, don't make it sound like. Mom, not making it sound like anything. I'm just making sure I understand. You want me to sell my house. We want you to be comfortable. The money from the sale could support your renovation. A pause. It's not just that. But it was, partly. And we both knew it, and the knowing sat between us on the phone line like something neither of us wanted to pick up. I'll think about it, I said, which was not a lie. I thought about very little else for the next week. Here is what I thought about. I thought about my daughter-in-law's face when she said the equity alone. The slight lift at the end of the word, like it was an appetizer she was offering me. I thought about the fact that my son hadn't mentioned the renovation in our other conversations. The renovation that was apparently making things tight. The renovation that, I later found out from a careless comment his wife made to a mutual acquaintance, they had started 6 months earlier. New kitchen, new primary bath, the works, and funded with a home equity line of credit against their own property. Except their own property, it turned out, had a little more borrowed against it than they'd mentioned. I didn't find that out from my son. I found it out from Gordon, a friend of my late husband's who'd been a real estate lawyer for 30 years before retiring, and who I still occasionally had coffee with because he had known my husband since they were both young men, and he knew how to talk about him without making me feel fragile. I phoned Gordon one afternoon and explained the situation as neutrally as I could, and he listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I have always valued about him. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Your house is solely in your name? He asked. Yes, has been since we bought it. We titled it that way deliberately. My husband was a contractor, and there was some liability advice we got early on. And you have no joint debt with your son? No co-signed anything? Nothing. Then your house is yours, he said. Entirely. Whatever they've borrowed or haven't, it has no bearing on your property. You understand that? I do, I said. But I want to understand my options. If I decided I wanted to protect the house from any future pressure. What would I do? He told me. What Gordon described was not complicated as these things go. A properly structured trust. A conversation with an estate lawyer, documenting my cognitive and physical health through my family doctor, not because it was in question, but because having it on record, formally, made certain things much harder to challenge later. He knew an estate lawyer he trusted, a woman named, well, I'll call her my lawyer, which is what she was, and he offered to put us in touch. You're not in any legal danger, Gordon said, but I don't think you're wrong to be thoughtful about this. No, I said. I don't think I am either. I met with the lawyer 3 days later. She was practical and careful, and didn't treat me like someone who needed things explained slowly. We talked for 2 hours. I left with a list of things to do and a very clear picture of what my options were. Over the next 6 weeks, quietly, I did them. I got a full physical and cognitive assessment from my GP, who looked at me over her glasses when I explained why I wanted it formally documented and said, "You're sharper than half my patients half your age," and wrote that down in somewhat more clinical language. I updated my will. I established a trust that placed my house under terms I controlled entirely, with conditions that made any future challenges to my capacity or intentions significantly more difficult. I named Gordon as one of my trustees because he is honest and because he had known my husband, and I trusted him the way you trust people who loved the same person you loved. I also had a very quiet conversation with my real estate agent, just to understand the market, just to know what the house would sell for if I ever chose to sell it. Not because anyone was going to make that choice for me, but because knowing the number meant I held it, not them. The number was significant. I wrote it down on a piece of paper and put it in the cedar box where I keep important documents beside my husband's death certificate, and the deed to the house and the letter he wrote me on our 25th anniversary that I have read more times than I can count. I didn't tell my son any of this. I didn't tell Britt. I didn't tell anyone except Gordon and my lawyer and my GP. The third conversation happened in June. My son called to say he and Britt had made another appointment to visit Lakeview Terrace, and would I like to come along, since they thought it might feel different to actually walk through the place. Sure, I said. When? He sounded surprised. He had clearly expected more resistance. Next Saturday, 2 o'clock. I'll drive myself, I said. I'll meet you there. I arrived 5 minutes before they did and stood in the lobby reading the notice board while I waited. There was an announcement about a watercolor workshop. There was a sign-up sheet for a book club, third Thursday of the month. There was a photograph of residents at a garden party. Everyone smiling the specific smile of people who have been asked to smile for a photograph. My son and Britt came through the glass doors looking relieved to see me there. The tour guide was a cheerful young woman who walked us through the amenities with the practiced warmth of someone who genuinely liked her job. The suites were nice. The gardens were genuinely pretty. The dining room had linen napkins. I asked about the art studio. I asked about the book club. I asked what the average age of residents was, and the tour guide said mostly mid to late 70s and above, which made me, at 63, a somewhat unusual candidate, but she kept her expression neutral about it. On the drive home, my drive home in my own car, I called Gordon. I saw it, I said, and it's a lovely place, for people who need it. He laughed, which was the right response. I'm ready, I said. When are you free this week? We met for coffee on Tuesday. I brought the paperwork I needed him to look over one final time. He read it carefully, asked 2 questions, and signed where he needed to sign. I put everything back in the cedar box that night. The family lunch was my son's idea again, 3rd week of August. Their backyard this time. They had a new deck as part of the renovation, pressure-treated wood and composite railing, and I will admit it was very nicely done. Their youngest was running through the sprinkler in the side yard. The smell of something on the grill. A Saturday afternoon that felt, genuinely, like summer. I brought a bottle of Niagara on the Lake Riesling and a fruit tart from the bakery on Claremont Street. And for a while, we just ate and watched the kids and talked about nothing in particular. The deck, the skating lessons, a road trip they were planning to the Maritimes in September. Then my son set down his glass and looked at me with the expression I had been expecting since April. "Mom, have you given any more thought to Lakeview Terrace? There's still a spot before the fall waitlist closes." I took a small sip of wine. I had been waiting for this moment for 4 months, and I had imagined it many different ways, and none of them had felt quite right. And sitting actually, here now, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph exactly. Closer to sadness. Sadness at what had grown up between us without either of us quite choosing it. Sadness that this was where we'd arrived. But I had made peace with the sadness a while ago. I could be sad and still be clear. I reached into my bag and took out a folder. Manila, nothing dramatic. I set it on the patio table beside the wine glasses. "I have given it quite a lot of thought," I said. "I've also given some thought to this." My son looked at the folder. Britt looked at the folder. "That's the updated title of the house," I said. "I've placed it in a revocable living trust. I'm the sole trustee. Gordon is my successor trustee. My lawyer reviewed everything in July." I paused. "There's also a copy of my updated will. You're still in it. But the conditions have changed." A silence. The kind that has weight. "Mom," my son said slowly. "What did you do?" "I made sure that my house is my house," I said. "Clearly and legally, and in a way that can't be revisited without my participation. I also had a full health assessment in May. My GP documented everything. Cognitively, physically, documented. Because I want it to be very clear that any decisions I make about my property and my life are being made by a woman who is entirely capable of making them." Britt had gone very still. My son was staring at me. "I'm not angry," I said, and I meant it. "I think you were worried. I think some of what happened was real concern, but some of it was also about the renovation and the HELOC and the way the numbers were looking, and I think you both know that, and I think it would be better for all of us if we just acknowledged it." "That's not." Britt started. "I'm not accusing you of anything," I said. "I'm just telling you what I know, and what I know is that my house is mine. I will decide what happens to it. If I ever choose to sell it and use the equity for my own retirement, that is my choice to make. If I choose to stay in it until I can't manage it anymore, that is also my choice. And if I choose to leave it, in trust, to my grandchildren." I looked across the yard at the little one who was now flopped in the grass, soaking wet and completely happy. "Then that is also my choice." My son's face had done several things in quick succession. He looked like he wanted to say something and couldn't find the shape of it. "I love you," I said. "I want us to be in each other's lives. But I need you to understand that I am not a situation to be managed. I'm your mother, and I know how to take care of myself." Nobody spoke for a moment. The sprinkler ticked back and forth. "The deck looks beautiful," I said. "Genuinely, he did excellent work." My son laughed. It surprised him. I could see that, and then the surprise softened into something more real. He rubbed the back of his neck, the way his father used to when he was embarrassed. "I'm sorry," he said, quietly. "Just to me, really, not to the afternoon." "I know," I said. Britt didn't apologize. I hadn't expected her to, but she refilled my wine glass, which I took as a form of acknowledgement. The kids came in for dessert. We ate the fruit tart, and someone knocked over a glass of lemonade, and we cleaned it up. And the afternoon went on in the easy way. Afternoons sometimes go on when the hard thing has been said, and there's nothing left to defend. I drove home in the early evening with the windows down and the radio on, Elmwood Park looking the way it always looks in August. A little dusty, a little golden, the kind of light that makes everything look like it's being remembered even as it's happening. I pulled into my driveway. I sat in the car for a minute with the engine off. My house was exactly where I'd left it. Mine.